The phone in my clinic has a specific, shrill ring that usually just means a routine checkup or a panicked owner with a constipated beagle. When it rang that Tuesday afternoon, I expected nothing different. I was at my desk looking over lab results, a world of neat charts and predictable biology, science, order. "Dr. Hayes' office," I said, leaning back in my chair. A voice on the other end answered, thin and dry, like the rustle of old paper. "Doctor, I require a house call." "Okay, ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" I pulled a notepad closer. "It's one of my children. She's not well." I suppressed a sigh. "Here we go. Your cat, you mean?" "Yes," the voice said. "Her name is Ginger." I scribbled the name down. "And your address?" The line went quiet. Not a dead quiet, but a listening one. I could hear a faint, rhythmic scratching sound, like a fingernail dragging lightly across wood. It went on for a few seconds before she spoke again, reciting an address on the old side of town as if reading it for the first time. It was a street I barely knew existed, a dead-end road behind the old cannery. "I'll be there in about an hour," I told her. "Thank you, doctor," she said, her paper-thin voice dropping a little lower. "The children are waiting for you." She hung up. I sat there for a second, the receiver still to my ear. The children. Right. Just another lonely lady treating her pets like family. It was part of the job. The house was exactly what you'd picture at the end of a forgotten road. A two-story Victorian that might have been grand a century ago, but now it just looked tired. The paint was peeling in long strips, and the porch sagged on one side. I parked my truck and walked up the cracked concrete path, my medical bag in hand. Before my knuckles could even touch the wood of the front door, it creaked open. The smell hit me first. A thick wave of ammonia, the sharp sting of cat piss, so strong it made my eyes water. But underneath it, there was something else, something cloying and faintly sweet, like flowers left in a vase for too long. And then I noticed the silence. My eyes adjusted to the dim interior, and I could see them. Cats. Everywhere. On the back of a worn-out sofa, peeking from under a dusty armchair, perched on a mantelpiece crowded with porcelain figurines. I tried to count, but lost track around 15. With this many animals in one house, you'd expect a constant hum of activity. Meows, purrs, the skittering of claws on floorboards. There was nothing, just the creak of the floor under my own feet. I took a step inside, feeling like I was breaking some unspoken rule. From every dark corner, I felt eyes on me. Not curious or scared, just watching. I fumbled for my pen in my shirt pocket, and it slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. In that instant, every single cat I could see moved. It wasn't a frantic scramble. It was a single, fluid motion. 20, maybe 30 heads, all snapping in perfect, silent unison to look at the pen on the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I bent down slowly, picked up the pen, and stood back up. The hairs on the back of my neck were tingling. They kept watching me, their heads still turned towards where the pen had been. "Dr. Hayes?" The papery voice came from the top of a shadowed staircase. A figure began to descend, a rail-thin woman in a faded floral dress that hung off her bony frame. Eleanor Vance. Her face was a web of wrinkles, her eyes pale and watery. She walked towards me. and I noticed something strange. As she spoke, her lips would sometimes stop moving, but her voice seemed to hang in the air for a fraction of a second longer, like a badly dubbed movie. "Thank you for coming," she said, her mouth closing just a beat before the sound of the words finished. "Ginger is not well. She is here." She pointed a long, bony finger towards a ginger cat lying listlessly on a threadbare rug in the center of the room. I knelt, opening my bag. As I did, I became aware of a shift in the room. I risked a glance over my shoulder. All the other cats had moved. They were no longer scattered around the room. They were arranged in neat, almost perfect rows, all of them sitting, all of them facing me and the sick cat. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way up my spine. Then I saw it. I watched their chests. They were all breathing in time. A slow, steady rhythm. Inhale, exhale. A room full of animals, all breathing as one. What the fuck, I thought, forcing my attention back to the cat on the rug. Ginger was feverish, dehydrated. I couldn't do a proper diagnosis here. "Mrs. Vance," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to take her back to my clinic. I have the equipment there to run some tests." "You will bring her back?" Eleanor asked, her gaze fixed on me. "Of course, as soon as I figure out what's wrong." I gently lifted Ginger into the portable carrier I'd brought in. She was limp, barely resisting. I stood up and secured the latch. As I straightened my back, I heard a sound, a soft thump. I turned around. Every single cat in the room had stood up, all at once. Not a single sound, just the soft padding of dozens of paws hitting the floor in the exact same moment. They were just startled, I told myself, the sound of the carrier latch. But the explanation felt thin, and it did nothing to calm the frantic pounding in my chest. As I walked to the door, I glanced back one last time. They were all crowded at the large front window now, a sea of silent, feline faces pressed against the glass. Their eyes, wide and unblinking, followed me as I stepped out onto the porch. I pulled the heavy door shut, and just as it clicked into place, I heard a sound from inside. A single meow. But it wasn't the high-pitched cry of one cat. It was low and resonant, a deep vibration that sounded like it came from 20 throats at once. Back in the clean, sterile quiet of my clinic, I felt like I could breathe again. I placed Ginger's carrier on the stainless steel examination table. She was still lying down, barely moving. I turned my back for just a moment to grab a syringe and a sterile vial from the cabinet. Click. It was the unmistakable sound of the carrier's latch. I froze. I absolutely knew I had locked it. I had double-checked it. Slowly, I turned back around. The latch was still closed, firmly in place, but Ginger was no longer lying down. The sick, weak cat was now sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the carrier. Her head was cocked to one side, and her green eyes were wide open, staring directly at me. She wasn't moving a muscle, just sitting and watching. That night, I couldn't get the image out of my head. The breathing, the coordinated movements, the impossibly locked latch. My scientific mind screamed for a rational explanation, but it came up with nothing. I needed proof. I needed to know I wasn't just seeing things, that I wasn't going crazy. So I did something I'd never done before. I set up a small security camera on a shelf aimed directly at Ginger's carrier and let it record through the night. The next morning, I came in early, my heart thumping with a mixture of dread and a desperate need for answers. I made a coffee, my hands shaking slightly, and sat down at my computer. I started the playback. For hours, the video showed nothing, just the still form of the cat, occasionally shifting in her sleep.
I fast-forward through the footage, my eyes scanning for any movement. Nothing. Maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I was just overtired. Then I reached the 3 a.m. mark. On the screen, Ginger's head lifted. Her mouth opened wide, as if to let out a long, silent meow. But no sound came from the video. Instead, a crackle of static erupted from my computer speakers. A voice, warped and faint, struggled through the electronic hiss. It was Eleanor Vance's voice. "He is a good boy," it whispered. "He will take care of us." My blood ran cold. My hand, holding the coffee mug, was trembling so hard the liquid sloshed over the rim. I slammed the mug down and hit pause. My gaze was locked on the screen, on the cat with its mouth hanging open. I rewound the clip, my breath held tight in my chest, and played it again. The same thing happened. The cat's silent meow, followed by that awful disembodied voice from my speakers. With a shaking finger, I clicked the mouse, zooming in on the image of the cat on the screen, getting as close as the resolution would allow. That's when I saw something I'd missed before. Under the matted, ginger fur on the cat's flank, something was moving. I thought it was a tumor at first, a nasty lump. But it wasn't still. It was pulsing. No, not pulsing. It was crawling. A slow, rhythmic slide just beneath the skin, like a slug inching its way through her body. It wasn't a part of her.
It was something else, alive and moving inside its host. My stomach lurched. I stumbled back from the monitor, one hand flying to my mouth as a wave of nausea washed over me. The coffee I'd just made threatened to come back up. On the screen, the thing under Ginger's skin continued its slow, deliberate crawl. It was a thick, dark shape, and as it moved, the skin rippled over it like water. What the fuck? What the fuck was that? Science. I needed science. My training kicked in, a desperate life raft in a sea of creeping dread. I shut down the video file, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard. A parasite. It had to be a new, undocumented parasite. Something hideously large, yes, but biological, explainable. I moved over to the examination table where Ginger lay in her carrier, still and silent. My hands, I noticed, were shaking. I forced myself to take a deep breath, the clean, antiseptic smell of the clinic a small comfort. With a careful, practiced motion, I drew a vial of blood from the cat's leg. She didn't even flinch. I walked the sample over to my automated blood analyzer, a machine that had never failed me. It was a box of pure logic. You put blood in, you get data out. Simple. I inserted the vial, punched in the commands, and waited. The machine hummed for a moment, then beeped. Not the usual confident chirp of a completed analysis, but a short, sharp error tone. On the small screen, a single line of text flashed in red. Sample unreadable. Data inconsistent. I stared at it. That had never happened before. I ran the test again. Same result. A cold knot formed in my gut. I took the remaining blood and prepared a slide for the microscope. Maybe the machine was malfunctioning. My own eyes. I could trust my own eyes. I slid the sample under the lens and peered into the eyepiece, adjusting the focus. The world swam into view. But it wasn't the familiar landscape of blood cells, the scattered round discs of red, and the larger, ghost-like white cells. It was wrong. Everything was wrong. The red blood cells weren't separate. They were clumped together, arranged in sharp, geometric patterns. They looked like tiny, perfect crystals of red, forming intricate, six-sided shapes that resembled snowflakes. It was beautiful in a way, and it was utterly, biologically impossible. A sudden, violent thrashing sound from the examination table made me jump back from the microscope, my heart hammering against my ribs. I spun around. Ginger was convulsing on the table. Her body was rigid, her back arched at an unnatural angle. A low, guttural noise came from her throat, a sound no cat should ever make. It was a wet, choking rattle that ended in a final, shuddering gasp. And then, she was still. She was gone. Protocol. Just follow protocol. My mind chanted the word like a prayer. I had to perform a necropsy. I needed to find the parasite, the thing I saw on the video. I placed the small body on the steel tray and picked up a scalpel. My hand was surprisingly steady now, driven by a desperate need for a physical answer. I made the first incision down her abdomen. No blood welled up from the cut, not a single drop. Instead, a thick, gray liquid oozed out. It had the consistency of motor oil and smelled faintly of damp soil and decay. I felt that nausea return, stronger this time. I widened the incision, my breath held tight in my chest. Her organs looked pale, washed out, but there was nothing that looked like the large, slug-like creature from the video. I continued my search, my instruments clinking softly against the steel tray. I opened the stomach. It was empty of food. Instead, it was packed with a dense, tangled mass. I used my forceps to pull it out. It was a hairball, but it wasn't made of cat fur. It was long, fine, human hair, silvery gray, the exact color of Eleanor Vance's hair. The moment the forceps touched the hairball, a new sensation started. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical feeling, deep inside my head. A low, steady vibration, right at the base of my skull. It felt exactly like a small cat purring, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I dropped the forceps, and the grotesque hairball clattered onto the tray. I stepped back, shaking my head as if to dislodge an insect from my ear, but the feeling didn't stop. It was inside me. The purring in my skull was driving me crazy. It was a constant, low-frequency hum that made my teeth ache. I needed to drown it out. I stumbled over to the small radio on my office shelf and cranked the volume, flooding the room with a blast of generic rock music. But something strange happened. The louder the music got, the clearer the purring in my head became. It was as if the external noise carved out a perfect pocket of silence inside my mind for the vibration to exist in, making it more distinct, more impossible to ignore. It was no longer a background hum. It was the main event. Panicked, I lunged for the radio and slammed the power button off. The room fell quiet again, and the purring? It receded, sinking back to that low, subtle rumble. But it was still there. It was a part of the silence now. I collapsed into my office chair, trying to document my findings. My hands were shaking too badly to write legibly. The pen scrawled meaningless lines across the page. What in God's name is happening? Who is that woman? The thoughts raced through my head, a frantic, desperate loop. Just then, the office phone rang, its shrill noise making me jump a foot in the air. I stared at it, my heart pounding. With a trembling hand, I picked it up. "Dr. Hayes?" It was her, Eleanor. Her voice was the same, flat and dry like dead leaves. "Don't trouble yourself with those questions, doctor," she said. "The important thing is that you understand. Ginger was just a message." The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering into its cradle.
I was frozen in my chair, the blood draining from my face. She heard me? She heard my thoughts? The purring in my skull intensified for a second, a low growl of confirmation, before settling down again. My eyes darted to my computer monitor, where I'd left the clinic software open. I had taken an X-ray of Ginger earlier, before the blood test. It had shown something strange. A few extra ribs fused together near the spine. I hadn't known what to make of it. I clicked open the file again. I blinked. Then I rubbed my eyes, thinking they were playing tricks on me. The image on the screen was an X-ray of a cat skeleton. A perfectly normal cat skeleton. The extra ribs were gone. My hands flew across the keyboard, my mind screaming. I brought up the file's information panel. There it was. A line of text that made my world tilt on its axis. Last modified, 7:14 p.m. 3 minutes ago, while I was on the phone with her. That was it. I couldn't stay here. My clinic, my sanctuary of science and order, had been invaded. I had to go back. I had to face her. I needed to know what she was, what she had done to me. I grabbed my jacket and my car keys from the hook by the door, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I almost ran out of the clinic, fumbling with the lock on the front door. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the dark glass panel of the door. For a single horrifying instant, it wasn't my own tired, scared face looking back at me. In the dark silhouette of my own body, I saw dozens of tiny, luminous points of light. They were pairs of eyes, cat's eyes, gleaming, watching me from within my own shadow. I cried out and stumbled back, and the image was gone. It was just me again. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I sprinted to my truck, my keys jingling madly in my fist. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life. And so did the radio. It flickered on, just as it always did. But it wasn't playing music. It wasn't static. From every speaker in the small cab, a deep, unified sound swelled to fill the space. It was the purring of dozens of cats, all perfectly synchronized, their vibrations merging into one low, hypnotic chord. It filled the truck, thrumming through the seat, the steering wheel, my hands. And it resonated perfectly with the purr that was already inside my head. The purr filled the cab of my truck, a physical force that vibrated up through the seat and into the base of my spine. It wasn't just coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from the engine, from the chassis, from the very air around me. Every molecule seemed to hum in perfect, hellish harmony with the vibration lodged in my skull. I drove on autopilot, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the winding road leading back to that house. What the hell was I doing? I should have been driving in the opposite direction, as fast as the truck could go, until I hit the ocean. But I couldn't. It was like I was caught in a current, being pulled back to the source.
I pulled into her driveway. The moment I killed the engine, the purring from the truck died. The sudden silence was so complete it was a noise in itself, leaving only the low, incessant rumble inside my own head. The house stood dark against the night sky, a single dim light glowing in a downstairs window. The front door was ajar. My hand trembled as I pushed it open.
The first thing that hit me wasn't the smell of ammonia and cat waste. It was the lack of it. The air was clean, almost sterile, with a faint chemical tang of bleach. The floorboards, which I remembered being filmed with dust and grime, now gleamed under the weak light from the living room. It was wrong. It was all so wrong. I stepped inside, my shoes squeaking on the polished wood. And then I saw them. They were all there, every single cat. Dozens of them, sitting in the living room, arranged in perfect, silent rows. They faced the entrance, their bodies still as statues, their heads all cocked at the exact same angle. A silent congregation waiting for a sermon. As I entered, dozens of pairs of eyes, green, gold, blue, swiveled in perfect unison to lock onto me. Not a single whisker twitched. Eleanor was sitting in her high-backed armchair, her back to me. "Welcome home, Alan," she said. Her voice was flat, but it echoed, as if spoken in a vast, empty hall. I tried to shout. I wanted to demand answers, to scream at her. My mouth opened, but the question died on my tongue. The word "who," it just wasn't there. It was like trying to remember a color I'd never seen. The concept of a singular identity, of asking who she was, had been neatly plucked from my brain. I could think of other words, other questions, but that one was gone. What is this?" I stammered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. The armchair began to turn, slowly, with a soundless grace. It wasn't the creak of old wood. It was a smooth, fluid pivot. Eleanor faced me, a faint, placid smile on her wrinkled face. She rose from the chair. But she didn't stand up like an old woman, all cracking joints and hesitant effort. She flowed upwards, a single, unbroken motion, like smoke rising from a fire. In the dim light, her papery skin seemed to have a soft, downy texture, a velvety fuzz that caught the light in a way that skin shouldn't. My eyes flickered to the wall behind her. Her shadow, it didn't match her body. It was too long, too thin, and it writhed. As I watched, horrified, the single shadow split apart, dissolving into dozens of smaller, cat-like silhouettes that squirmed and crawled over each other on the wall before melting back into one. "The shepherd is tired," a voice said. It came from Eleanor's mouth, but it wasn't just her. Every cat in the room opened its mouth at the same time, and a chorus of soft, synchronized mews blended with her words, creating a ghastly, layered harmony. As I entered, dozens of pairs of eyes, green, gold, blue, swiveled in perfect unison to lock onto me. Not a single whisker twitched. Eleanor was sitting in her high-backed armchair, her back to me. "Welcome home, Alan," she said. Her voice was flat, but it echoed, as if spoken in a vast, empty hall. I tried to shout. I wanted to demand answers, to scream at her. My mouth opened, but the question died on my tongue. The word "who," it just wasn't there. It was like trying to remember a color I'd never seen. The concept of a singular identity, of asking who she was, had been neatly plucked from my brain. I could think of other words, other questions, but that one was gone. What is this?" I stammered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. The armchair began to turn, slowly, with a soundless grace. It wasn't the creak of old wood. It was a smooth, fluid pivot. Eleanor faced me, a faint, placid smile on her wrinkled face. She rose from the chair. But she didn't stand up like an old woman, all cracking joints and hesitant effort. She flowed upwards, a single unbroken motion, like smoke rising from a fire. In the dim light, her papery skin seemed to have a soft, downy texture, a velvety fuzz that caught the light in a way that skin shouldn't. My eyes flickered to the wall behind her. Her shadow, it didn't match her body. It was too long, too thin, and it writhed. As I watched, horrified, the single shadow split apart, dissolving into dozens of smaller, cat-like silhouettes that squirmed and crawled over each other on the wall before melting back into one. "The shepherd is tired," a voice said. It came from Eleanor's mouth, but it wasn't just her. Every cat in the room opened its mouth at the same time, and a chorus of soft, synchronized mews blended with her words, creating a ghastly, layered harmony. My blood ran cold. A new voice. My stomach dropped as I understood. This wasn't about Ginger. It was never about the cats. It was about me. I was the next case file, the next host. Then they started to move. The cats didn't walk or run. The entire assembly slid forward as one, a flowing river of fur and muscle that poured across the floor and pooled around my feet. I braced for the sting of claws, the bite of teeth, but there was nothing. I only felt a strange, pressing warmth against my legs, a soft, insistent pressure from all sides, holding me in place. The purr inside my skull exploded. It was no longer a rumble. It was a deafening roar that shook my thoughts apart. But it wasn't a roar of anger. It was a roar of welcome, of love. It was a promise of an end to loneliness, a sense of belonging so absolute, so overwhelming, that it felt like drowning in warmth. Join us. Be one with us. You are home. The words weren't words, they were feelings, blasted directly into the core of my being. My own thoughts, my memories of my quiet apartment, my solitary life, my belief in science and reason, they all started to fray at the edges, dissolving into this wonderful, terrible warmth. I felt a spasm in my throat. I tried to scream, to fight it, to hold on to the last piece of myself that was still Alan Hayes. I opened my mouth, gathered all the air in my lungs, and pushed. The sound that came out wasn't human. It wasn't a scream.
It was a high, thin chord, a perfect harmony of dozens of meows, perfectly in tune with the creatures surrounding me. My own voice had been stolen. I was just another instrument in their orchestra. My mind was slipping, being pulled under by the tide. My knees buckled, and I crashed to the floor, the warmth of the fur river engulfing me. I was done for. It was over. Just then, a sharp crack echoed under my right knee. An old, rotten floorboard had given way beneath my weight. A splintered edge of wood, sharp as a razor, jabbed deep into the flesh just below my kneecap. Pain. A white-hot spike of agony shot up my leg. It was clean, it was sharp, and it was mine. It was entirely, beautifully, horribly mine. It didn't belong to the collective warmth. It was a singular, private sensation in a sea of shared consciousness. That searing, individual pain was like a lightning strike in the fog of my mind. It gave me a second, just 1 second of clarity. My eyes focused on the splintered hole in the floor. Below it was nothing but blackness.
the crawl space, my only way out. There was no thought, no plan, there was only instinct. With the last ounce of my own will, I threw my weight forward, twisting my body and rolling into the hole. I fell into cold, damp darkness. I landed hard on packed earth, the impact jarring my teeth. Above me, the hole was instantly framed with dozens of pairs of glowing eyes, all staring down into the dark. A single, unified hiss, like steam escaping a busted pipe, echoed from above. I didn't wait. I scrambled forward on my hands and knees, my injured leg screaming in protest. The air was thick with the smell of wet dirt and decay. Cobwebs, thick as cotton, tore across my face. Something skittered away in the darkness just beyond my reach. I didn't care. I just crawled, frantically, blindly, towards a faint sliver of moonlight I saw at the far end of the foundation. It was a ventilation grate. I reached it and threw my shoulder against the rusty metal mesh. It groaned, but held. I hit it again, desperation giving me strength I didn't know I had. The frame bent. On the third impact, the whole thing tore loose with a screech of tortured metal, and I tumbled out onto the damp, dew-soaked grass of the backyard. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision swam. The single sharp point of pain in my knee, the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. The only proof that I was still just me.